Oh no! Hi, I'm Chris. Welcome to King Bespoke Creations. Now we've got another weekend project, only this time I'm not going to tell you what to build. You might be using big plywood sheets. They're really good for great big projects. You might be doing a DVD storage unit or a bookshelf or anything else like that that can come through that wants these great big sheets of wood. And plywood is a really good material. It's nice and stable, it's real wood, it's not chipboard, it's not MDF cardboard. So we're going to use some of that today, but they're not the easiest things to work with, these great big 8x4 sheets. So we're going to have some little tips and tricks on using those to make sure we get the best quality out of them and just how to manhandle them in the first place. Okay, let's crack on then.
So obviously the first problem is literally moving that massive sheet. Not the easiest thing when you're up by yourself. Trying to get it on top of the workmate. Kind of get it on the corner, carefully tip it, trying not to chip the corners and the edges, and then using just balance and leverage, getting it in the right place.
So with these great big sheets we sometimes need to be a little bit inventive. I don't have a workshop big enough to hold the entire lot, so I'm using a little workmate. And even that's not good enough because I clamp it on one side and then the whole thing tips over. So I'm going to use some of these. Okay, so these quick clamps are great. A lot of different clamps have these as well. So not only can they clamp in, they can clamp out by undoing that, taking that off, and then sticking it on the other end, and it can push apart as well as doing that, which means we can hold it up at one end as well. Even that's not going to be enough. When we start sawing along the grain along here, that's obviously going to want to compress, and there's nothing holding this side up. So there's a trick for that as well. So once I've made that initial cut that's going to happen up there, I can then clamp a decent chunk of wood at this end, clamp it on both sides, and it will still hold this relatively stable as we work through. So a lot of you will know I love using hand tools wherever possible, but on something like this where the whole board is just a little bit wobbly, trying to use a hand saw is just going to make everything bounce. So it's down to the jigsaw, which means using these, and it getting a bit noisy and dusty for a while. Let's crack on.
Well, I want a 9-inch strip, so I'm just going to measure off a fraction more than that, so I've got room for a little bit of planing. And just then run the pencil along the edge of your ruler to give you that really long pencil line that we're after. So here's a trick. When you're using plywood, it wants to tear. So putting down some masking tape over where you're going to cut, and you can still see your pencil line through the masking tape. That masking tape just holds the edges in these separate layers because they're so thin layers, stops them from splitting up.
So you've got a really nice clean edge all the way up there. There's been no tearing. And then we're going to go over that face with the plane. Now I'm going to start at that end coming this way on. You don't have to use a plane that way, you can turn it. The reason I did that is because if I go that way, some of these upright levels will pop out. Once I've done that end, it's just a matter of working our way through. And you can tell when it really is flat, because it'll feel nice and smooth and flat all the way through, but you can hear the noise as well. See how bumpy that is? You can hear it skipping over the parts with the gaps underneath. And then we have just one consistent sound all the way through, so I know that that's now level. I do the same all the way back across the board, flip it over, get all the edges done. So once you've flattened off the edges, you want to be trying to get tiny little whispers like that, just one or two runs across the corners, and that'll just stop it catching and fraying off and tidy it up really nicely. Right, sometimes even with decent plywood you can saw through it and you find these gaps. This is quite an excessive one. I haven't come across one quite as massive as that. That's actually flexible to go in there, so that's going to need fixing. There's no way we can leave that at all, even if it's not for sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill it with super glue and then pour some sawdust in there. Always have a little pot of sawdust in your shed, in your workshop, ready for fixing stuff. Super glue and sawdust can fix an awful lot of things. I'm just going to flood that in there. That'll seep down into the furthest reaches and start gluing up some of those parts. And then I can tip in a little bit of sawdust on the top. And plywood like this, it doesn't matter what colour that sawdust is either. Tap it in, see if we can fill some of that space up. Kind of push that in there. So there's lots of glue at the bottom of that joint. And then filling this up will stiffen up this top end, just giving it that little bit of rigidity again, because we can't just leave massive holes in there. Alright. Little can of super glue accelerator. It's a great thing as well. By the time you put your can back on your shelf, that's completely dry and we can plane that down again. There we go, fixed. Now, when you've got corners to do, sometimes the internal corners are simple, you just get the jigsaw to meet, but here we've got an external corner. Now I don't want to waste any board, so what I'm doing is I'm using a 2mm drill bit to just go straight through 2 or 3 holes, and then you can go in at bits of angles and you can get rid of that gap, and it gives you just enough space to slot your jigsaw blade back in without wasting any board. I used a masking tape trick when we were going through the long cuts using the jigsaw, and that was because it was going along the grain, so that masking tape was strong enough just to stop these edges from chipping up.
Once we're going back to cross grain cut, now I know this is plywood, but I'm really thinking about these face sections. I'm going to go back to using my knife lines again because I know it's going to be more accurate. Now I could just go straight through there. I'm going to mark a little note there so I can get the tape measure out of the way. Rattling saws that hang up. So now I can make that full cut across. Now it doesn't need to be very hard because it's plywood, so that veneer level that we're really interested in isn't very deep at all. Now that's made a cut mark that you can see there. Now the trouble is, this is the side that's 84 inches that I want to keep, but I really want to keep these excess sides as well, especially when we move on to the shorter lengths, because the excess will be used for other parts of this project. So if I just cut with one line like that, yes, I'm going to save this edge, but I'm not going to save this edge. So I need to do two lines. I need to do a second line that's about the width of a saw. So I'm going to again push my square up to the knife mark there and then score down so that I have a pair of lines like that. So now as I go through there with the saw, I've got a protected line on that side and a protected line on this side. And that will need to be done on both sides. So I can find my knife mark and then square that off. Then I can flip it on its side again using this same registration face that I used before to go through with those two lines and do those on the other side. And then it's just picking up the plane and just skimming down so you can see that visible knife mark, and you know exactly, just a couple of skims is all it takes to flatten it off to perfection.
So there we go. Plywood being that very versatile material, it keeps it nice and long, nice and stable, good flat source of wood. Sometimes you can get plywood sheetings that have a really nice attractive face to them as well. In the instance I was using on that, it was all getting painted white to be built into a bespoke pantry unit. Okay, well in that case you definitely need to sharpen your tools for some plywood. The sharper your plane, the easier everything becomes. So go and sharpen your tools and I'll see you soon.